Perfect. Well, I'd just like to start off our session today by mentioning that I am on Treaty 7 territory and calling in from Calgary, Alberta. I am new to Calgary, so I'm still working on my land acknowledgement, but I would love to invite all of you to share your own land acknowledgement in the chat. If you feel inclined to do so, I would love to hear where you're calling in from today. Otherwise, I'm going to invite our panelists that we'll be hearing from today into our session. So first, I'd like to introduce Shannon Peston, who is an experienced former banker turned entrepreneur and co-founder of the Finance Cafe. We also have Marianne Wood joining us, who is an accountant at Simply Right Accounting. And I am just so pleased that you're both here with me today. Thank you so much. We will jump right in. So I'm going to start us off with our first question, which is, you're both entrepreneurs who work in the financial space. Could you both tell me a little bit about yourself and what your company's offerings are? You can just jump right in if one of you is eager to get started.
Go ahead, Marianne.
Okay. So I am in the Treaty 6 territory down by Bonnyville. So we are a few hours away from Calgary and Edmonton. I originally started off as a proprietor when probably about 15 to 16 years ago. So I started as a proprietor, and then as I gained a little bit more knowledge, I decided to become an incorporation. So with that was the education behind it, trying to get the experience that you can find with what is out there, especially for female entrepreneurs. And so right now we do offer bookkeeping services, tax advice, business advice, personal taxes. We try and fill a whole mound of information that is hard to find. So we do open ourselves up. If there is a question that we do not know, we will find the research and the information and then provide it that way as well.
Thanks for sharing, Marianne. And Shannon.
Hi, Kara, and welcome to Treaty 7. We're so happy to have you on this side of the country. So welcome, but I am calling in as well from Treaty 7. And that's the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, also the Tsuut'ina and Yahe Nakota Nations and the Métis Nation Region 3, as well as all people who call their homes here in Treaty 7 who make their homes here. So really nice to have you here, Kara, and excited to have you as part of our Métis Nation as well, now that you're in Alberta. So I am a former banker, as you mentioned, and I spent about 10 years working in small business lending. And I focused a lot on women entrepreneurship. When the pandemic hit obviously March 2020, I knew then it was going to be my time to go off on my own and start my own company, because I recognized that women entrepreneurs were going to be harder hit during the pandemic. And I wanted to be more on the ground supporting women entrepreneurs as we would go through the pandemic. So I started a company called Peston Consulting, and that really works a lot with government. It works with a lot of the ecosystem partners to help look at some of the programming that exists for women entrepreneurs across the country, including for Indigenous women. I support Kara and Ashley in that way. But the other company that I started with a girlfriend of mine is called the Finance Cafe. And the Finance Cafe is all about creating a more gender lens approach to financial literacy and business financial literacy in particular. You know, being a banker and having that experience, I've sort of had a front row seat into some of the challenges that women have around business financial literacy, where some of the gender gaps are around capability and confidence. And so the Finance Cafe is hoping that we're helping women entrepreneurs navigate through what can be a fairly complex financial system, and as well just helping them understand how to become better financial stewards of their own companies.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Shannon. And again, I'm just so excited for this conversation. Today, obviously, we're specifically talking about financial literacy, which is going to lead me into our second question here. You both have lots of experience in the finance field, but from each of your perspectives, what is financial literacy and why is it so important in business success? Shannon or Marianne?
Yeah, I can start with that one for sure.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
you know, from my perspective, there's a lot that's wrapped up into financial literacy, and often we think it's just about the numbers. But when you take a look at financial literacy from a holistic perspective, you see that, you know, a lot of the way that our mind works in financial literacy, how we feel about money, our money mindset, impacts our lived experience around money, impacts our financial literacy. So yes, it's about the numbers, but it's also about trying to understand how much we know, how to apply that knowledge, also what our behaviors are around money as well, and some of the habits that we have. So yeah, it's more than numbers from where I look at it from, and helping us understand where some of these behaviors come from a more internal perspective. Oh, and I guess to answer your question, part two of that is, why is it important for business? It's important because we need to understand why we make the decisions that we make. And when we have the information, we feel a lot more in control of our companies. We're able to see opportunities. We're able to see some of those early warning signs in the business as well. And also it helps us understand like how we price our products, or how we bring our products to market when it's time to, you know, increase our prices. There's a lot of pieces that go into this. And again, this is where the emotional side of it comes from as well, because how we feel about money is also going to influence all the financial decisions that we make inside our companies.
Thanks for
Very,
sharing.
yeah.
Sorry, Marianne, I was just going to pass it to you. There we go.
Very, very well said. Shannon, you've hit on quite a few points for the financial literacy. Absolutely. It's definitely having that confident understanding of how savings works, how investing works. Without having that confidence, we may not make the best decisions or the full knowledge to make that right decision. Ultimately, it's a sense of having financial, excuse me, well-being and self-trust. If we can't trust the decisions that we're making, it's going to be a lot harder to make that. It's definitely important in business to have some kind of financial understanding, just as Shannon had mentioned, so we can make those right decisions. And that's where this is actually really good, because I feel it's going to give a little bit extra information that quite a few of us are lacking right now.
Thank you so much for sharing, both of you. And I think that all of the points that you made just help solidify why Financial Literacy Month is so important, and why we're having these conversations and events throughout November. So for our next question, and this one is specifically for Shannon. Shannon, could you tell us why it is important that we place an intersectional lens on financial literacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a lot that's built into this question as well. So if we take a look at women in finance, just generally, so forget about the fact that when we add intersectional layers or barriers on, things get even more complex. But let's just take a look at gender equality and the move towards creating a more inclusive and sustainable economy. We cannot have gender equality without having financial inclusion, and we can't have financial inclusion without having financial literacy. So it's kind of a system of change around the conversation of what is financial literacy, and how do we apply it in our day-to-day lives. And the studies and research would show us that when it comes to financial literacy, women self-report. And so this is, I think, important. We see this a lot in the Indigenous space. I know that when WEKH did their research, financial confidence continues to be something that hits the top of the list when it comes to areas of growth that Indigenous women are looking for. So we know that when women are self-reporting to be less confident and less capable, it's impacting how they feel in their businesses and impacting the connection that they have to their businesses. And we also know that most women entrepreneurs keep a smaller business. So, most of them are going to be under that $100,000 of revenue. We know that a lot of Indigenous women are more sole proprietors, or they're informal businesses. Some don't even recognize themselves as entrepreneurs. So I think taking the financial literacy, and particularly a lens on business financial literacy, is so important to helping us understand how women entrepreneurs show up in the market, and specifically to this conversation, how Indigenous women entrepreneurs show up to the market as well. But we do know that when we have these intersectional barriers, if you layer on for, say, women entrepreneurs, if we take a look at financial literacy and access to financial literacy, we know some of the barriers are greater if you're an Indigenous woman. Now, if you're an Indigenous woman with a disability, or you associate yourselves with another community, those barriers they're even more amplified. So even more important for us to take an intersectional lens at financial literacy and recognizing the unique experiences, and the fact even within Indigenous women, it's not we're not a homogenous group. We have very different backgrounds and different challenges that we have to overcome. So that's why an intersectional lens is really important when we look at this.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad that you mentioned the research that WEKH has done, because time and time again, that's something that I see come up when we speak to the Indigenous women in our networks about finance and financial literacy. Is there's these added barriers that not everyone considers all the time. So in saying that, this question is for both of you. So maybe I'll invite Marianne if you want to jump in and answer first. What are we talked about the barriers that Indigenous women have with finance. Now, what are some barriers that Indigenous women have with financial literacy? Do you want to elaborate on that?
From my experience, because I have helped quite a few both male and female entrepreneurs start up a business, and one of the more common areas that I find is the home and family life. So as a female, as a woman, we are the nurturer, we are the home. And lots do struggle with trying to find the time to continue the home running and then start their business. Some also have the lack of education, which, we do the best we can with what we do have. So we like to put what you do have into perspective, and we push you forward, and we can help guide through that. Some of the other things is definitely the confidence. We are so used to staying at home that to step out into the world where maybe we don't feel as safe anymore, because that home life is our security. And then another big one is pricing ourselves. Lots of times we don't feel we are worth what we should be charging. So that is one of the biggest areas that I have run into with entrepreneurs.
Interesting. And I'm just curious, your last point there, do you think that ties in with the confidence that we were talking about?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even for me, I know right at the beginning, I didn't feel I was worth it. I didn't feel my knowledge was right on par with everyone else. And even being in business 15 years later, if it comes time where I need to raise the prices because the economy, everything is going up around us, I hesitate because I'm scared. If I raise my price, what's going to happen to me? So you tend to stay where you're comfortable, but it is definitely the confidence to know our self-worth, and what we do have to offer is very unique.
That's a great point. Yeah. And pricing, again, something that comes up in every finance conversation that I have. So I'm really glad that you brought that up today. Thank you. Shannon, did you want to add anything in?
Well, I think Marianne did a really great job at explaining this. I also think that we have to step back also and see the world that we live in. It's a very westernized perspective of what success is and what business should look like. And there's a lot of stereotypes that we have to get around in terms of even like the word entrepreneurship and how that resonates even for a lot of women, myself included. In fact, like when I was growing up, my family had a small business, and my parents would have never used the word entrepreneur. Like we used small business owners as, growing up. So entrepreneur, that word didn't even come into play until really the tech boom came in. And so that kind of changed the language and also how we perceive success as entrepreneurs. entrepreneur. So I think that's also part of the challenge. And I love that Marianne really did talk about confidence, because even myself as a banker, when I stepped off on my own too, it's a scary thing to put yourself out there. And particularly when you're a service-based business, because there's nothing really tangible that you can give, so it's harder to show where that value is. And so finding the right price to put yourself at can be a difficult conversation to have, even with yourself. And I think sometimes we take for granted the unique gifts that we have, and maybe we assume, and maybe I'm this way, but I assume that everybody knows what I know. Like there's nothing special about me. So therefore, there's nothing, I'm not really adding value, but I forget that where my unique gifts is around being able to see a story through the numbers and being able to help entrepreneurs move through that financial journey. So yeah, it's just kind of knowing yourself and what value you bring to the market, I think is a tough one. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the full question for you, Kara, but I would say those are the big pieces, like the confidence. Oh, and I would like to say too, that in my experience, when we think about capabilities, I think when I said earlier that women self-report, I think we really underestimate our abilities. And most of us don't start our businesses, unless you're Marianne, because you're an accountant or you really like the numbers. Like you might start a business out of necessity. You've lost your job, or you're an important part of the family dynamics and you need more, cash flow to the family unit. Or even as entrepreneurs, maybe there's something that we're really passionate about bringing to market. But I feel that for a lot of us, because if we didn't grow up in big math, in a math field, or didn't study accounting, we think that we don't understand the numbers. But I'll go back to 10 years ago. I had a marketing career before I went in to become a banker, and I didn't know how to read a financial statement. I almost flunked out of every accounting course that I ever took. And I didn't enjoy the numbers, but I was able to learn it. And once you're able to learn the financial literacy and how the numbers show up on paper and the story that it tells, it actually, I often say you're like a little investigator in your own company, because you can start pulling back the layers, and every number on your financials, every number that it shows up there tells a story, and it shows every decision that you've made in the company. So it actually can be kind of exciting. And I think we have to change the narrative a little bit around what financial literacy is, because at the end of the day, it's really just helping you make better decisions as an entrepreneur.
Well, I am not a math person, but you just got me excited about financial statements. So I say that was a big success. I am not easily excited by numbers, but we've done some talking about why financial literacy is important, some of the barriers around Indigenous women's entrepreneurship and financial literacy for Indigenous women. For people that are either watching this recording later, or some women on the call maybe today that are thinking of starting a business or just starting to launch their venture. Again, this question is for both of you. What are some financial considerations when starting a business or growing your business? I know those are two different things, so feel free to approach this question in two parts, or however you think makes the most sense.
Marianne, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you. So one of the bigger considerations that I have found, or I have run into, is your time equals your balance. So how much time are you willing to put in to have your balance? I know sometimes we want to just give and go, but then we become tired and exhausted and frustrated, and we feel that it's not going to work anymore. We feel like we're just hitting that wall. So we have to figure out what that time and balance is that we're willing to put forward to starting any type of business, or even the education aspect of that as well. You definitely need a really good business plan when you're presenting anyone with the business mind that you have. And one of the big things that I like to tell everybody is, for your first 3 years in any business, you're not going to see a very large profit. You always have to spend money to make money. And at the beginning, it's very, very hard to jump in and be able to pull the big dollars right away. And again, that goes back to that time and the balance that you're willing. So those are my three things.
And when I think about financial considerations, so I would say the first is, what do you want out of your business? Like, why does it exist for you? And trying to be like, align your personal goals to what you want your business to do. Because at the end of the day, if your business isn't helping you achieve something, why are you in it? There's no reason for you to stay the course, and there's no reason for you to stay invested when times do get rough. So having that passion, knowing what you want from your business, that's a huge financial consideration. When you're starting a business, the other thing to consider is, how much money do you have to help you start that business? As Marianne said, it takes money to make money. So you're going to have an investment in the business. Maybe it's buying inventory or buying supplies or buying equipment. So really knowing what it's going to take for you to get your business off the ground. And the next is how much, like having a personal budget to say, how much does my business need to bring in so that you can cover the expenses that you have in your personal life. I know a lot of entrepreneurs that start something as a side hustle. They might have a full-time job, or, you know, they're just trying something on the side just to even see if it's going to make them money. The second thing is, from a financial consideration, is knowing what price set you're going to offer, because if you're not offering a fair price, and if we look at it from a product standpoint, but if you're not pricing your product properly, you won't make a profit, and you won't be able to make a meaningful difference in the community or to your family or even to yourself. So those financial goals are really important. And I would also say, engage, especially for Indigenous women, like a lot of the AFIs, which are Aboriginal financial institutions, have support around bookkeeping, have support around mentorship, and have the connections. So like, never be scared to go to an AFI that's in your community. NACA is probably the most known, because they oversee all the Aboriginal financial institutions across the country, of which I think there are 59. But it's a really great starting place to get some of those tools and resources, and just to know that you're never alone. And from a growth perspective, when we think about financial considerations, you know, growing is always, I would say, the goal of a business, because when you're growing, you are making more money, and the goal for any business is to make money. And I want to just kind of emphasize this point, because a lot of us want to be able to give back, and our businesses are a tool for us to do better in our communities, to be able to help our families. Like there's more than just one bottom line, I think, for most Indigenous women entrepreneurs. And so our companies need to be able to make a profit to be able to do those things. But the most important thing I'd say as you're growing is knowing how to use financial capital as well. And by financial capital is, when do you need to use a loan? When do you need to go to a bank to help you get maybe some growth capital? Or how do you use your existing customer base, like your profits that you're making, as that revenue to be able to keep investing in your company, using those profits to reinvest in the company? And I'd also say too, always being sure like that you can hold your business for, you know, for downturns. Like business is always, it's not going to be a constant. You can never expect the same revenues all the time. So knowing if the months get slower, or, you know, you can't invest as much time in the business, then how does that impact you personally, financially, as well as the business?
You both made so many great points there, so many considerations, and one that I wanted to touch on just briefly was, you know what? I can't even read my own writing, so we're not going to touch on it. I'm looking at this, I'm trying to sound it out. I'm like, never mind. But there are, so many considerations. And something that I wanted to bring up was just that hustle culture, like you said, Marianne, that like you need to be willing to come into your business and realize that you're not going to be making those big dollars right away all the time. And like you said, Shannon, that in growing your business, it's not a constant thing. There are going to be downturns. And I just think that's something so important to touch on, is because I think a lot of people have misconceptions about what their business is going to look like when it launches or when it's growing. So thank you for bringing those points up, and all of your other amazing considerations. On top of the considerations, I'm wondering if you could elaborate on some of the biggest mistakes that you see entrepreneurs make when they start out in regards to their finances.
Well, for me, I would say not having a financial plan, and the numbers is as much as, if this is not your area of strength, it's so important to know how your business is going to make money and how, when you're going to start turning a profit. And a lot of entrepreneurs that I've met, this is the part where they kind of dig their, their head in the sand. And my partner in the finance cafe will often say it's like I think it's the ostrich syndrome is, you just turn a blind eye to it and you think, oh, okay, maybe my bookkeeper is going to tell me if I'm profitable, or I'll just wing it and see what happens. And that never pans out very well. So it's really important to think about, okay, well, how am I going to start making money? Who are my customers? What makes me unique? How am I going to price this? What are my expenses in the business? And so I think the biggest mistake is not really focusing on the numbers. I think we're really good at thinking about, why we exist and the impact that we want to make, but it's how we're going to do that. And the how is really through the numbers.
Marianne, did you have something to add?
Yeah, so some of the mistakes that I have seen, and we go into business with so much confidence and we want to do it all. If you're going into the field of numbers and bookkeeping, absolutely, you can do it all. But if you're going into creating skirts or creating a product of some sort, it's really important to have a conversation with a bookkeeper or an accountant, excuse me, just for that extra knowledge, because what we think is right sometimes is not right. And the CRA has changed its rules every year. Something is changing, something's updating, something's getting removed. So it's up to that accountant or bookkeeper to give you the updated guidance and what is allowed within business. One of the things from a bookkeeping accounting perspective is brand new businesses. They will, and I did speak on this earlier, they will take that full paycheck the first few months, which is draining the business because the business still needs that money to complete its full operations. And I'll sit and I'll have meetings with them and just suggest not to, or take half of that paycheck and just for a few months, let it ride out where we can. So those are some of the few that I have seen around.
No, those are definitely some great suggestions. And I mean, consulting with an accountant or a bookkeeper, I think we have two fantastic financial professionals today here who will both advocate to that. And I'm wondering if, and I know this wasn't one of our questions, but, or maybe it was one of our questions and I'm jumping the gun here, but Shannon, you mentioned NACA as somewhere for Indigenous women to go and find resources or to access capital. Did either of you have any organizations or individuals that you think everyone should have on their radar here today? I know I'm coming out of left field here, so if you want me to come back or if something comes to you later on, feel free to just jump in.
Well, I do think like NACA is doing a really great job at creating tools that are specific to Indigenous women entrepreneurs. I can even speak to the Finance Cafe. Like we do have an online program that is a progressive program. So it takes you right from understanding your money mindset to understanding the financial fundamentals to understanding what profit is and how to generate it and keeping cash in the company. There's so much that we look at in the Finance Cafe, all the way to how to get outside financing for your companies and starting to break some of the myths around the differences between debt financing or equity financing. So we get a little bit deeper there. And, I would also say that if you are working with a bank, often the banks will have some educational tools as well to be able to use. But I think the most important people around you is to have a bookkeeper or an accountant around you, a lawyer who can really help advise you from a legal perspective, And a banker is also an important one. If you're not ready yet for a banker, you're not yet at that stage. You could also look to other mentors, like other women who are in your field or who have been successful in this, because what you want is the right advice around you so that you start off on the right foot and that you know how to grow in a way that is sustainable.
Some of the programs that we have available in our area, and every area is going to be a little bit different. So you can always reach out to your local community futures. They do offer quite a few different programs, as well as the Chamber of Commerce. Lots of them will put different little courses on. So if you're watching and there's a financial course up, a few years ago, they had a payroll course, and I think it was a $25 registrant fee. You sat there for a day, you got the documentation right from Alberta standards. So just to keep those little things out. And again, with the banking, they do have different opportunities as well, to keep an eye out for.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of those, both of you. I'm actually just popping both of your information and links in the chat here for any of our participants to access so they can connect with you or your business after. Oops.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yes, thank you for your patience. I am managing the chat and moderating at the same time, so wearing a few different hats today.
Well, you're doing good.
Well, oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to get us back on track with the questions here. I know I came out of left field with that last one, but Marianne, this question is specifically for you. What are some services that you can expect from your bookkeeper or accountant, and what business advice? Oh, sorry, I typed the question twice. What are some services and advice you can expect from your bookkeeper or accountant?
Thank you. So from your bookkeeper and accountant, one of the biggest things, because your financials are very confidential, you really need to trust who you're basically becoming into a partnership with. This person is going to know everything about you, how you do your operations. So trust is always the number one. If you do not feel a connection or a trust within that bookkeeper, reach out. There's so many out there, and you will connect with them the way that, whether it be with the product or the full understanding. Some specialize in farming. There's so many out there that really portray different areas of business. So as a bookkeeper, they will have the information that you're looking for. So they will help you organize your monthly transactions, how to maybe start that bank account. Every bookkeeper is going to be very different. We offer even business startups, so we know how to do the registrations, how to get those trade names going, start your GST account when you become big enough to obtain a GST number, create that payroll. The bookkeeper should have some understanding of payroll. If you step outside the proprietorship and you become that incorporation, do you do payroll or dividends? So in order for them to give you the best advice, they need to have that good understanding, which is going to help your business and your personal side at the same time. They should be able to provide you month-to-month financials, updates, if you have payables, receivables. There's so much in business. If you're struggling with invoicing, ask them to help you. If you are getting lots of companies that you owe monies to, ask them to help create those checks, so then you can come in, review them, sign, mail them out. And same with the government. So if you do become GST or payroll, there is deadlines to file by. So the bookkeeper should give you those monthly or semi-monthly reminders that, hey, this is due this month, bring in everything, and they should be able to complete that within that timely fashion.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And oh, sorry, Shannon, were you going to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say too that, that I mentioned earlier, like a banker is really important for you too. And I'd love to be able to share what you should expect from your banker as well, because I think, Marianne really did a great job at explaining how much breadth and depth there is behind the bookkeeping and all the different resources that you can be assisted with. And I think that that's really important. And I think for a lot of us, we just kind of learn as we go, right? You don't know what you don't know. And these are the professionals that are going to be able to help you navigate through all of that. And from a banker, I also say that what you should expect from a banker is that they're going to be able to, first of all, advocate for your company and help you move along the funding continuum or the funding journey. They should also be able to help you give you some information about other industry stats. So to help you understand if you're performing well in your industry, or, maybe they will have some industry insights. They're also really great connectors. And so bankers have a very, very wide network. And we know that for most women entrepreneurs, we don't have the same social networks that our male counterparts have. So using our bankers as, as a networking tool is also, I think, really important to highlight. But you should also expect that the banker is that you feel that your banker is invested in you. It is a partnership. And especially when you start looking at lending, the bank should see you like it is a relationship, and they should see, you as somebody whose company they're supporting, but they believe in it. And if you're not feeling that kind of support, it's time to find a new banker.
That's great. Thank you both for sharing. And it sounds like trust trust is just really the key with these relationships. And I know from my conversations with IWEs that we want to do it all. And we think that we can wear every hat in our business and wear it well. But you know what? Business, like you said, Shannon, networks are so important, and we can't do it all sometimes. There's just some things that we don't know. We don't have the education, we don't have the tools or the knowledge yet. So having those networks and those connections in our businesses is just astronomically important. So thank you so much for sharing that. Our next question is for Shannon. Oh, you already answered this question. It was about what to expect from your banker. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much. But I do have another question for you, so we can jump into that. And this has to do with what are some financing options that are available for Indigenous women entrepreneurs. And I know that you elaborated on this a little bit with NACA, but are there any specific programs or initiatives that you maybe have in mind?
Well, yeah, there are. So there's maybe I'll just kind of back up and give a little bit of just a background. So there's different types of financing. This is why it gets so confusing, is because the funding landscape is really, really wide, because there's debt financing, which basically means you have a lender somewhere. So you owe that person back the money that they've borrowed to you, along with interest. And then there's equity financing, and we'll often hear about equity finance more in like the technology space. And equity financing would be like your venture capitalists, your angel investors, the people like that are on Dragon's Den, for example. And so you really have to know what kind of financing you need for your company. The thing with equity is that you're actually giving up some of the ownership in your company. So somebody comes in as a shareholder, now they have a voice at the table and could fundamentally change what your vision is for the company. But I would suggest starting out with like finding the AFI that's in your network. For many of the provinces, there are organizations like women's enterprise centers, such as in Alberta, we have Alberta Women Entrepreneurs. In Saskatchewan, there's Saskatchewan Entrepreneurs. In Manitoba, it's Manitoba Women Entrepreneurs. I think it's Women Entrepreneurs of Manitoba. And there's one in BC as well. So I know that at least the Western provinces have very dedicated agencies that are supporting women entrepreneurs, but also they're willing to take on a little bit more risk than a normal bank would do. So they're more focused on helping women start and grow their businesses. And Marianne mentioned earlier as well, community futures. If you have a community futures in your neighborhood, also a very important player who do actually have specific programming as well for Indigenous entrepreneurs. And so these are some of the agencies or types of agencies that you can go to for help in the business. But it's also, and having conversations with like your bookkeeper, also, again, really important to say, well, what kind of financing should I look at for my company? So if you're growing and you need money, or you need startup money, there's money when you start up and there's money if you grow, but your bookkeeper can also say to you, here's what type of financing you're probably going to be looking for in the business. And so I would think your bookkeeper is also, Mary, I don't know if you would, how you feel about that, but, you know, and why that's important too, is when you get to the point where you have financial statements, it's also knowing, or when you're starting to make enough profit and you're starting to wonder, like, do I take all the money out and just pay myself in dividends? Marianne was talking about that earlier. That has implications if you wanted to do things like financing down the road, because you won't have equity necessarily in the company. So a bookkeeper can help you sort of navigate some of those as well. And your banker should be having that conversation too.
Well, there are definitely lots of resources out there. So, and I get to see a lot of them with the work that I do with WEKH, which is amazing. But yes, definitely speaking to your banker, your bookkeeper, accountant, I think would definitely help navigate the system. There is so much out there. And I think maybe this is a conversation for another time, but I will just say that Indigenous women, we've seen through our research at WEKH, are sometimes a little reluctant to go for outside capital. They want to fund their business by themselves. Just wondering if you have any comments, or just like, because it's not uncommon to fund your business with external capital. It's not, you know, so is there just any advice or comments that you'd like to give to someone that maybe is feeling a little bit wary about going to find external capital, or talking to a banker or accountant about this?
Well, great question. And I can certainly take a stab at it. And I would say, first of all, again, talking to a banker is really a great place to start. And most of us, actually all of us as entrepreneurs, have to put in our own money. Like, we have to have an investment in our own companies. We have to we are the first investor in our business, put it that way. When we're starting our businesses, it depends on, like, I think a lot of us are taught that, you know, debt is bad, especially in our personal lives. People will often say, like, oh, you know, like, debt is, you don't want to be carrying debt personally. But in a business, if debt is being used to help you grow, so for example, let's say you want to buy a piece of equipment that's going to allow you to produce a whole bunch more, I don't know, you make chocolates and it's going to help you make a lot more chocolates. You know that that's going to be revenue generating down the road. So that kind of debt is actually good debt, because you can finance the equipment over a number of years and it's actually helping the business grow. If you were taking on debt to buy like office supplies and computers, those aren't revenue generating purchases, but they're important for the operations of the company. So you wouldn't be able to finance, well, you can finance some equipment. I should be careful with saying you can't finance that, but that's stuff that's not going to be generating you additional income. So from a debt perspective, I think, talking to your banker, talking again to one of the AFIs, one of the, the advisors there, to be able to help you navigate that. And a lot of businesses, like if you're a cash business, you probably don't need, like if you're cash in, cash out, as an example, or you're small, you might not need lending at all. But when we start looking at growth money, so when we start looking at being able to grow our companies, that's more when external financing comes into play. And there are different types depending on what type of industry you go into, what type of what you're financing. So purchasing equipment would be different than, say, you were purchasing a building for your business. So there's a lot of different considerations, and entrepreneurs aren't expected to know all those. This is why it's so important to be able to find a trusted partner that can help you navigate through that.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Marianne, was there anything that you wanted to include in this question?
I think Shannon actually, she said a lot of the things that I would say on that question.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. We are coming up on time, and we're going to be moving into our Q&A session very soon. My final question for you, and I kind of, again, jumped the gun with this in the chat, but where can people find you?
Well, probably the chat, if you go into the chat and look for the Finance Cafe, certainly we are there. And there's also my social handles. So please feel free to reach out to me there. And that's where people can find me, Marianne.
You can find me on Facebook. I do have the website that was listed as well, simplywriteaccounting.com. I am in LinkedIn as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to both of you for an incredible insights, incredible conversation. I will mention that I will be sharing all of the contact information and socials for Shannon and Marianne in our follow-up comms. So don't worry if you didn't get a chance to write it down or can't find it in the chat, we will get it to you. But what I would like to do now, I'm going to remove the spotlights and we can open it up to a Q&A session. So if you do have a question for one of our speakers or both of them, I'll invite you to unmute yourself, or if you're not feeling comfortable doing that, you can just pop your questions in the chat and we'll address them that way as well.
I did see one come into the chat and I see that Marianne has answered it as well, but maybe if we can just read that question, which is, I can't see, oh here, I can. How much revenue do I need to make as a sole proprietor before I should consider a corporation as a business model? Does this vary by province? And I think Marianne did a good job at answering this question, but there is no limit on the revenue that you're generating. At some point though, talking to an accountant and a lawyer to advise you on this, probably even more so a lawyer, because it actually comes down to some of the liability challenges more so than anything else. So when you're a corporation, so as a sole proprietor, you have full liability for your company. When you move into a corporation status, it separates you a little bit, not a little bit, it separates you from the business because the business is actually looked at as a separate legal entity. So there's considerations there. One of the challenges that we see around financing, so things like accessing grants or accessing some of the procurement channels, you actually need to be incorporated. So it's not just a question of how much revenue you're making. It's again the type, and your lawyer can assist you with this, so can your accountant. But you want to look at incorporation more holistically than that, which actually does come down to tax benefits. It does come down to liability and access to financing and procurement and grant opportunities.
Thank you both for answering that and for flagging that, Shannon, that there was a question in the chat. And thank you for answering it before I had a chance to even notice it was there, Marianne. I will again invite anyone who has a question to unmute themselves or pop a question in the chat. All right. Maybe while we wait, if anyone's typing or thinking up their questions right now, I do have a question for Marianne, and it is whether every business should consider using accounting software. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
You definitely do not need to purchase accounting software right at the beginning. The Excel that is just on our computers is a very good place to start. You would create your revenues and your expenses, and you just create the different expense accounts, office supplies, the supplies, depending if you're creating products, your job supplies, and all of that can be tracked within. And the best is on a monthly basis, because then it's going to be easier to see back when something was purchased or which month you made a higher profit than other months. So you can kind of see your path of busy seasons and your slow season, because in every business we all have one of those, and then we get to budget and maybe create more in our slow season than we do in the busy. Some of those accounting programs, they do cost quite a bit. For us, we use QuickBooks Desktop, QuickBooks Online, Sage Accounting. There is a couple other ones that you can use, but it just depends on how much you want to utilize in that program. If you're just looking to track sales and a couple expenses and not pull reports, then there's programs for that. But if you actually want to utilize it a little bit more, then that is a question. Once you do talk to a bookkeeper to see what they use, because if you do plan on moving forward eventually within that bookkeeping service, you want to either start using the same program that they're using, and then it's not such a big change when you do have to roll the information over to them.
No, that's fantastic. And something I never thought about, consulting, yeah, with your bookkeeper to make sure that you're using the same software, because I imagine that could probably lead to some headaches.
Well,
if
and
not dealt with.
absolutely. And if you establish that bond and you know that, you know what, you guys have good communications together, there's good advice, you can actually utilize some of the knowledge that you're receiving to learn that you have a program they've never used before or is no longer offered or recognized anymore. Some have said that the government will audit more programs than other programs. I have yet to see the truth behind that, but I've heard it a lot.
I can speak from like a personal perspective. When I first started my company, I did an Excel spreadsheet and it worked really well for a period of time. But when I started to get more customers and I had more invoicing, I went to QuickBooks, because for me, it was just easier to track everything and I could see everything at a glance and I could pull financial statements, and it did end up helping me make different decisions for my company. But if you're a company that's, say, maybe like making $10,000 in revenues a year, to go in invest in an accounting software is probably not the best use of your money. But it really depends on how sophisticated, I'm not even sophisticated, but how your business is growing. Like, are you getting more customers? Are you really starting to pay out a lot of expenses? Do you have the time to be tracking that in Excel every day? And a lot of it comes down to how much your financial management is, because it is a lot more on you at that point to make sure that you're staying up to that on a monthly basis.
Awesome. I don't want to keep talking in case someone's like waiting to jump in and ask a question. So I'm just going to pause for 10 seconds if anyone has a question.
Hi, I can jump in here.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, is it not working?
Oh, I can hear you now. I think we lost you for a second there.
Okay, sorry about that. So I work for an Aboriginal financial institution, and I really appreciate all the advice you're giving today, Shannon and Marianne. So I just want to say that first. But I know from my perspective, working for an AFI, sometimes our clients don't think about their financial statements or their financial management, for example, until they're looking to expand their business and need to seek bank financing or other things. So from your perspectives, what are some things women entrepreneurs should be doing regularly to make sure their business is in a good financial position for when they look to expand their business? And what kind of questions should they be asking their bankers or accountants on an ongoing basis?
Well, you bring up a really great question, Victoria, because, and this goes back to, again, the more control we have over our companies and the better managed they are financially, the more likely we are to be able to succeed in getting financing and getting that support. And so what I would say is, like, and again, it really depends on the type of business, like how much revenue is, like how, is your business your full life? Like there's a lot of different consideration sets to make when you're looking at the financial management of your company. But it's knowing, like, are you making a profit? Being able to stay on top of what your costs are, knowing, where there's opportunity for growth. And I find that when I was a banker, a lot of entrepreneurs would come in, they'd want to be able to ask for a loan, but they didn't even know what they really needed the loan for or how that loan was going to generate a positive return for the business. So really understanding when to use lending. And I think this is, and the AFIs do a great job at being able to also coach through that as well, because not every business is going to be ready for financing. So for example, if you don't have equity in your company, if you don't have the cash flow to be able to repay a loan, if your company is, if it doesn't have enough working capital or enough operating capital to manage your day-to-day expenses, it's going to be a lot trickier for you to go get a loan. In fact, it's probably going to be impossible, mostly impossible for you to get that loan. So there are certain criteria that the bank is looking for. And so the financial statements are really important in understanding certain dynamics of them. So again, like how is your working capital? Do you have equity in the company? And if you were to take on a loan for the business, how would you pay it back? Is the business making enough money to pay it back? Does that answer your question, Victoria?
Yeah, thank you.
The other thing too, maybe from an accounting perspective, one of the things too that I'll just kind of give some advice on is making sure that your accountant knows what your business goals are as well, particularly if you have an incorporated company, because if you're trying to borrow money, for example, if you're taking everything out in dividends to not pay the same level of corporate taxes, as an example, the company is not going to have equity in it. So making sure that, because your accountants are going to create your financial statements in one of two ways. One, to make sure that you have enough equity in there to be able to keep growing the business and look for external financing. Or the second is to help you with getting the most tax benefits or helping you to pull out your money so that you're paying less taxes. So it's really important that your accountant knows what your goals are as well.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate what you both said about building that relationship with your bankers or your accountants. I know a lot of our clients have a relationship with us as an AFI, but also establishing those relationships with your bank also and your accountant, because if you don't have that trust, then it becomes a lot more difficult. And then I know clients run into problems later on. So thank you both for your comments there.
Thank you. And there's just one more thing that I do want to add in. We build trust also by showing our bankers and our accountants that we're invested in our business and investing in looking at how it's actually performing. So when we know the language and we know how bankers are thinking, when we know what key things accountants are looking at, it does help that relationship, because you also feel like you have more power as an entrepreneur. You're not sitting across the desk from them feeling, insecure, or that you can't explain what's happening in your company. So again, I'll go back to the Finance Cafe. It's one of the reasons that we've created that online program, is to help you start understanding the money side of the business so that you can talk more confidently to your bankers, to your accountants, and people that have an interest in the financial side of your business. I also want to share that we have a podcast. I'm going to put this in the chat. So the Finance Cafe does have a podcast that you can listen to. And we cover all things financially related. So I mentioned earlier that every decision you make has a financial consequence. So we talk about all things from getting a retail strategy to moving from the kitchen to the global stage and exporting. So there's a whole bunch of different conversations that we have all around financing.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And yes, definitely pop that in the chat. And if you could send me that link as well, I can definitely include it in our follow-up.
Sounds great.
Perfect. Well, I know, sorry.
I'm just trying to find it for you. So just give me 1 second to get in the chat. I know we'll have to get going here. Well,
we do have, I believe 15 more minutes. And I know I said we had time for another question, but I will open it up now. And if there are no questions, then we will move on to the next part of our event. So unmute yourself or forever hold your peace. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to our wonderful speakers, Marianne, Shannon. You shared such incredible insights today. I am just so honored to know both of you and to be able to plan this session with you and share the resources that are available in the ecosystem with all the Indigenous women who are either on the call today or going to be listening afterwards. So thank you, and WEKH.
Thank you so much for having us as well. And best of luck to everyone. We just want to see you have successful business ventures. So all my best to you.